how to write the statement of the problem. So in line with the refreshment course that I've already provided in my previous videos, this is by far one of the very simplest to actually do. Because in writing the statement of the problem, we actually go to what aspects of the research we intend to elaborate further on. So with that being said, let's get right to the content itself. So of course, why do we need to write the statement of the problem? Because it is actually needed for us to familiarize ourselves to the concepts that we actually plan to discuss when conducting the research and the entirety when writing the research itself. So, of course, based on McGaslin and Scott in 2013, it's actually an act of familiarizing oneself with the study. Furthermore, this is actually explained by Borg and Gall in 1996 that it actually addresses the central issue of the study. So therefore, it also has a function of collectivizing the concepts that we actually have to elaborate further on our research. And with that being said, we, in the process of it, actually provide ways on how to synthesize and how to look at the bigger picture of our research conduct. What is the research for, and ultimately, what are the expected problems that it wants to address? Because basically, in writing the statement of the problem, it strengthens the idea of writing research questions. What issues do we want to address? What concerns do we want to actually discuss in the research itself? So, that being said, let's go to the very particulars of that. The statement of the problem is actually written into two parts. So, the two parts, we go to the general problem, or essentially your main question. You actually need to provide a unifying question that encompasses number 2, which is, of course, your specific problems or your sub-questions that might elaborate and might deepen the discussion that's already provided in the research. So, that being said, there are actually 3 types of research questions that, as follows, are the following. They are the causal questions, the descriptive questions, and of course, the comparative questions. So let's go to them one by one. The first type of question is of course the causal questions. Now, the causal questions has this aim to compare 2 or more phenomenon that are actually determined, or if they have certain significant relationships with each other. So, ultimately, there's another way that we could actually view this type of question, because in the causal question, coming from the root word cause, we're actually looking for the reasons as to how and why these certain social phenomena actually exist. So, in the process of doing so, by writing the causal question, we ultimately ask the questions why and how. Now, for the second type of question, we go to the most basic type of research questions, which is of course the descriptive questions. So the descriptive question, it basically just seeks to describe a phenomenon and often study how much, how often, or what is the change that are essentially manifested in the results or the expectations that will be presented in the study eventually. So, in writing the descriptive question, another way that we could view this is how to answer the question what. We basically need to describe the scenario. We just need to describe, we need to provide certain background information to further substantiate the study. So, it's by far one of the most basic type of questions to ever be written as the statement of the problem. Now, the third one is identified as the most advanced form of research question, which is of course the comparative question. So the comparative questions aim to examine the difference between 2 or more groups in relation to 1 or more variables. So by doing so, coming from the root word compare, you're actually doing the idea of comparing the positive, the thesis, and the negative, the antithesis, and combining them all together, therefore developing a synthesis. So why is it so advanced? Because the very attempt of synthesizing your analysis, synthesizing your data, is already a means of critical thinking. Therefore, it's a higher level of evaluation, to be honest. So, with that being said, the comparative question aims to not necessarily ask the question which, but rather it aims to answer the question which has the better blah, which has the better manifested behaviors, which has the better manifested acts, which has the better significant or much more significant data, etc., etc. So, in writing the comparative questions, it's by far the most advanced way in writing the statement of the problem. So, by doing so, we need to take note that the type of research questions will indeed influence the research design in general and its totality. Let's say, for example, we often use too much of the descriptive questions because essentially, we need to provide one general statement and of course, three specific questions. So let's say you provide us with descriptive questions all throughout the types of questions. You only write descriptive questions. Then, ultimately, you could actually view the research in two things. Number one, it can be viewed as a quantitative research. Or number two, it would be, or essentially it would have very limited discussions. Should it answer the question, what? So, as much as possible, we need to instill variety over the types of research questions that we actually have. So therefore, it answers the question whether should we choose one question or should we use all of them. You have the option to use all of them. But the most important thing here is to choose the questions that are most appropriate in your context of the study. The context of the study is prevailing in this sense. So therefore, you need to make the necessary adjustments based on the appropriateness of the context of your research. That's what we need to remember. That's what we need to remember most importantly. So, that being said, I'd like to give a sample title. So, a sample title here is, of course, let's say, for example, I'd like to pursue the emergent behavioral mindsets in the youth towards quarantine measures from the COVID-19 pandemic. So, let's say that's going to be my sample title. So, now, let's go to my sample research questions. This is basically how to write the research questions in print. So, the research question starts by expressing the following. The researchers aim to address and discuss the following issues and concerns. Insert colon. First, you provide the general research statement. So, the general research statement, as I've said earlier, only needs to be one. So, my general research statement for the topic of emergent behavioral mindsets among the youth in times of the quarantine measures in the COVID-19 pandemic is essentially I want to answer the question, what are the emergent behavioral mindsets manifested in youth groups age 16 to 21 during the quarantine measures from the COVID-19 pandemic? I want to answer that question ultimately because that's basically the point of my research. Again, I'd like to point out that the general questions is essentially the question which explains the point of the research. Ultimately, what do you want to ask? Or what question do you want to answer once you pursue your certain research proposal? So, that's the general research statement. Now, let's go to the specific research questions. Now, the specific research questions here, I already provided three. So, as I've said, you have the option to provide 3 to 5. 3 to 5 research questions, or ultimately, if you're just a beginner, just focus on 3 specific questions. Now, again, the specific questions only need to elaborate the general statement. So, here are the specific research questions. Number 1, what are the categorical differences of the youth groups aged 16 to 21? That's the first question. Number 2, why is there a manifestation of unruly behavior amongst the aforementioned youth groups? And number 3, are there any significant changes in behavior based on social status? Now, what I want you to do now is I want you to make a guess on what type of research questions did I actually use upon writing these three specific research questions. So to answer that question, I've already provided the answer. My first question is, of course, a descriptive question. Second question, of course, is of course a causal question. And third one is a comparative question. Why is number 1 descriptive? Because basically I just asked the question, what? I asked the question, what? Therefore, I want to provide myself with background information. And I think that the necessary substantial background information that I need for my research is to determine the differences or the categorical differences of the youth group, age of the youth groups, aged 16 to 21. So that's one backgrounder for my sake. Now, secondly, why is number 2 considered a causal question? Because ultimately, it answers the question why. Why, or essentially it asks the question why. Because in causal questions, we look for the cause. We tend to explain phenomenon as well as how and why they exist or exhibit themselves or manifest themselves rather in actual reality. So, why is there a manifestation of unruly behavior? So therefore, I already provided the very point of my research, which is of course to discuss unruly behavior amongst the aforementioned youth groups in terms of the quarantine measures. So that's one thing. And number 3, why is number 3 rendered as a comparative study? Number 3 is rendered as a comparative study because I aimed to make a certain comparison based on the social status of my informants. So let's say, for example, my question here is, are there any significant changes in behavior based on social status? Or perhaps I may even ask, are there any significant differences that exist? Are there any significant differences in behavior that exists based on social status? So of course, in this attempt, I would like to refer to those who actually belong to the marginalized group, for those who actually belong to the middle class group, and of course, for those who belong to the elite group. Are there any significant behavioral differences that may manifest themselves throughout the study? So in that question, I actually aim to make a comparison on the types of respondents that I would most probably encounter in the research. So, with that being said, I'd like to end this discussion by encouraging you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel, of course, if you want to stay updated to most of my outputs. And of course, ultimately, I want you to also visit my Facebook page, which is entitled The Street Academic. And I already provided the link there. So basically, if you have any questions, you may reach out to me personally through that Facebook page. And of course, I'll try my very best to be responsive to most of your concerns. So, ultimately, I want to thank all of you for viewing this video. So if you found this video to be actually helpful for you, I'd like to encourage you to share this video to those who you think might need it. So, that being said, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and sanitary.